And one of your aims is to simplify the science, the technology, the application of some of the programs. One of the most important, one of the most prominent we hear spoken about here at COP17 is RED.
Yes. Yes.
A complex mechanism.
Yeah.
What does it mean in simple terms?
Well, the word RED means reducing emissions from deforestation and degradation in developing countries. And this is a complex process that we try and make simple, and we produce books on it, like this one here, the little red book, and that's the Mandarin version if you want to look at that. So these books describe how you might go about reducing the smoke that goes up in the atmosphere when you cut down these tropical forests. And the reason why they've been cut down is many and varied, but often it's largely agriculture, large-scale agriculture that needs the land. They cut down the trees in order to grow crops like soy and palm oil, and cattle ranching in Brazil, for instance, and that means you've got to clear the forest, and often it's burnt. And when that smoke goes up in the atmosphere, that's causing about 17% of all global emissions. That's almost as much as the entire global transport sector.
So the aim of RED is to encourage people to make it financially viable for them not to chop down trees. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. I mean, in simple terms, it's to pay people and countries money based on the carbon that would be saved and stopped going in the atmosphere. That was the idea of RED, was to pay them not to deforest. But it's not about just giving a check to a tree, because it's not the trees that cut themselves down, it's people that cut them down. And this means transforming the way agriculture is done in tropical regions. And of course, you've got to then think about the demand, because the need for that food is often coming from countries very, very far away, people like you and me who are eating beef, using palm oil in cosmetics and things like that, or in biofuels, or soy that's actually in Europe, used to feed chickens and pigs. These products are traded all over the world, but it causes deforestation in the tropics. So it's understanding that whole supply chain and changing it.
And changing it in what way?
Well, what you want to do, one of the things you've got to do that RED is beginning to think of, is how you reduce what drives deforestation. And what that means is working with the cattle ranchers that might only have half a cow per hectare. If you could make that 1.5 cows per hectare, then you could produce more beef on less land. That would take pressure away from forests. Of course, there is another argument which says eat less beef, and then you wouldn't need to have so much land either. That's another kind of argument, but the fact is the global demand for beef, particularly in India and China, is rising very fast, and that translates into pressure on forests. So dealing with the drivers of deforestation is a crucial part of these negotiations.
So we've managed to simplify it, I think, between the two of us. Where do the major complications lie in applying some of these technologies, some of these programs?
Well, there have been a lot of complications. One of the things is, how do you know that people have stopped deforesting or not? These areas, huge areas the size of Europe, in the case of the Amazon and so on, well, you can do that by satellite now. Quite clearly, you can look right down to almost a single tree and see whether it's still there. Then you've got to engage ground truth. That means communities on the ground who live in these forests, and one of the things we're working on is working with communities to empower them to monitor their own forests. This is called MRV in the negotiations, monitoring, reporting and verification. Well, communities live in these forests. You can empower them by, we're working with Google, for instance, to use Android phones, very robust ones. You can drop them in the river and take them out, but you can collect data on these, which the communities own, and then you can be analyzed, and you can report on the health of your forests. In return, people will pay you to look after the health of your forests. And so that's a way that communities can get benefits which improve their education, health. Justice is very important. Another big problem for the negotiations is who owns these forests. Often no one knows. And sometimes the government say, well, we own it. Sometimes the communities do. And that all has to be worked out legally. So that's another big barrier.
What is the message you bring to COP, and what is it you hope to get out of COP for your organisation?
Work faster. It's all going far too slow. Every year about 13 million hectares of forest goes up in smoke. In these negotiations, you find governments are often comfortable to say, well, I think we'll get round to having RED all sorted out by 2020 or 10 years from now. Well, that's 1 billion tons of carbon that's gone up in the atmosphere and millions of hectares of forest that have been lost. We simply don't have that time. We have to find a way to work more quickly. And that's really what we've got to find. It's not enough just to wait whilst RED works itself out over 2 decades, and by the time we've got the answer, half the forests have gone. So what we're seeing now is, I think, RED has done extremely well in the negotiations in that it's one of the best organized methodologies. We sort of know what we need to do. It's got a lot of political will behind it. It's got money behind it. But I think let's not wait for the UNFCCC to come up with the answer. Let's let that go on, but let's get started on RED now using the money we have.